Okay. Today is the 11th of April. My name is Jimmy Anselmo, and I was the owner and creator of Jimmy's Music Club.
So Jimmy, where did you grow up in New Orleans?
Okay, I grew up in the French Quarter in Treme. My dad bought a house there, and I lived there from the beginning, when I was a baby up until about 1958. He had a house on North Robertson Street, close to Esplanade. My parents divorced when I was 5 or 6 years old, and my mother and my dad were still good friends, but I would spend the weekends with my dad in the French Quarter because he had different businesses there. His first business I could recollect was the Mardi Gras Lounge on Bourbon Street.
So the Mardi Gras Lounge. So can you tell us a little bit how big it was?
It was a 3-story building. I think it was built around 1850. And it was a 2-story building from what the history of it, and then they added another story later. My dad was there from like 1946 to, he's the one that put the name on it till about 1953. And the name of it was Jimmy King's Mardi Gras Lounge. And he always used his name because my dad was a professional boxer. He boxed all over the world. He was a welterweight. And he had entertainment there. I think one of the bands was Papa Celestine. And one of the recollections as a little boy, during the daytime, I'd play with the drum kit, and my dad said, "You better get off of that, the musicians will kick your ass, boy."
So was this basically when when the clubs back in the day, was it mainly catering to tourists, or were there actually locals going there?
Well, it was tourists and locals would go there. Okay, probably a lot. Also, Bourbon Street wasn't closed off. They had traffic, cars driving through it. They didn't close it off till maybe in the late '60s. But they had more probably entertainment clubs than burlesque clubs. And the burlesque clubs at the time, I can remember as a little boy, they had a band that would, back up the strippers. I remember seeing my first strip club was at the Prima's 500 Club. My dad said I must have been about 9 years old. He said, come upstairs, you see this show. So I was with a friend of mine who I got to see my first burlesque show at the 500 Club.
So do you remember any of the burlesque dancers you actually saw back in the day?
The Cat Girl, she was a famous dancer. Blaze Star, Ready Flame. I can't think of the other ones right offhand. I got to see all the shows because when I was 14, 15, I would be delivering food from my dad's restaurant into the strip clubs.
And where was your dad's restaurant in the Mardi Gras Club?
No, this was later. Okay,
this was later.
This was like in the 59, 60. He had a restaurant on the, let me see, I think it was the 400 block of Bourbon. It was called King's Barbecue.
So, what hours would like your dad's club have kept back in the day?
I was too young to remember. I remember staying in the apartments, but they stayed open till maybe 3 in the morning, and his restaurant stayed open till maybe 3 in the morning.
Did your dad? So he had the King, the Mardi Gras Club. What was the were people dressed up? It was a casual crowd?
No, they dressed up. They went to the clubs back then, Like I said, they had photographers who would come by and want to take pictures. They were coat and tie and all that. But his first place was called the Little Blue Room, and this was right off of Bourbon Street, across from Arnold's Restaurant. He opened that up in 1936. He was there till he opened up the Mardi Gras Lounge.
Now, did your dad have, like, you see these old movies where they actually had the cigarette girls and the coat checks, the
yes, he had all of that, right.
So he had that,
right.
Okay.
Can you say a little about the Prima family? You mentioned the 500 Club.
My dad was good friends with Louis Prima and Leon Prima. After my dad's boxing career in the 30s, he went and worked for Leon Prima as a bouncer. And they were good friends, Leon Prima. Then he opened his first club in 1936 called the Little Blue Room. half a block off of Bourbon.
Do you remember any of like the decor, what it looked like inside back, like the little blue room?
I had photographs of it. I think we'd witnessed some of it. You know, it was kind of a narrow place where the bar was, and then there was a big open in the back, and he had entertainment there also. I remember he had African-American bands playing there. Okay. And I was too young for that. I was born in '44, and don't remember much of that.
Can you describe a little bit of your dad's next club, the Mardi Gras Club, what that looked like? Yeah.
I remember he also had these very risque murals all around the club. He had an artist put that up there, and for the time it was rather risque, you know, because there's nudity in the murals, Mardi Gras scene, women, you know, naked, and he changed it around. First of all, he had like a bar on one side and the rest was a seat, and then he made a horseshoe bar later on, I remember.
Where was a stage near the horseshoe bar, or was it separate?
The stage was, let me see what the stage was. I think with the horseshoe bar, it was like in the middle, surrounded by the bar.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And he would have like a full-on band playing
Yes,
there?
Yes.
Now, did he also serve food in that restaurant?
No, he didn't serve food in the Mardi Gras Lounge. Not too many clubs back in those days had food. I remember the famous store. My dad was good friends with the owner. His name was Hip Ginley, because he was friendship with him because prior to him owning the famous store, he was like a boxing promoter.
So the famous store also had bands, and that also
Yes, it was all bands, right.
And that kind of was at that place you were talking. Who was, you know, you always hear about the famous store having a really legendary
Sharky
band.
Banano, Santo Pecora, one of the bands. And also they had a comedy dance duo. It was Pork Chop and Kidney Stew. They used to come in there. It was kind of like a blackface thing, but yet they were black, okay? And they put a little dance floor there, and they'd dance to that and everything. And Sharky Banano, that was his band. Also, there was a bartender there named Curly. And he used to work for my dad at his other club, the Little Blue Room, and then the famous store he worked there. He was called the Singing Bartender. So the band was, it was a horseshoe setup where the bar was in front of the stage, like, and he'd give the mic over to Curly. He didn't sing a song. And I worked there as a teenager later when I was like, when I was 18. I was a senior in high school. I worked there during the Christmas holidays.
Did they also have, didn't, like back in the day, Dr. John and Freddie Fender and those guys also work in a band at the famous store?
No, they didn't work there, Dr. John. He worked at a place called the Dream Room. He worked there, and also my brother-in-law had a club called Madame Francine's, and he worked there. Like on Sundays, they'd have entertainment there, his band, and then they would have like a jam session late at night, and Dr. John worked the jam session. Not Dr. John, Mac Rebennack.
Mac Rebennack. And then at some point they also had, did Booker ever play any of, didn't Booker do organ?
Yes. Booker played at my brother-in-law's club, Madame Francine's.
And I think he was the first one to really play organ in New Orleans.
Yeah, my brother-in-law bought an organ for James Booker to play.
And then he taught Mac Rebennack, and then they started going, the other clubs started getting organs.
Right.
What was your brother-in-law's name?
Bobby Blanchard. He owned that in another club called the Guys and Dolls.
So, all these clubs are basically right on Bourbon Street?
Yes. Well, and there were some other clubs that had live music. There was a place called Tony Amarica's Parisian Room. That was on Royal Street, about a half a block off of Canal. They'd have like a big Sunday evening jam session there.
Did you ever go to the, what's that club, the Brass Rail Club?
That was mostly strippers then, the Brass Rail.
Because I know back then, before that, it used to be Paul Kane, I think, was there.
Did you get to know any of the musicians at the Mardi Gras Lounge? Or?
I was too young at the time. You know, like I said, I was too young, but at the famous door, I remember the musicians, because there was a little restaurant called The Spot where all the entertainers would go there on their break. It was right off of Bourbon Street, and I got to meet, you know, Sharky Banana, Santo Pecara, the Dukes of Dixieland, and George Durrott. Some of the people playing there. And I remember Jack Teagarden played there. He was supposed to be a famous entertainer.
Yeah, he was.
Right.
And then later on, you came into contact. You came into contact with Matt Rebennack at Madame Francine's. Where did you first encounter Joe Clay?
This band called Johnny J and Hitmen. They were playing with him, and they came in and played my club.
But did you know Joe Clay back?
No, I didn't know him back then.
Did you know Freddie Fender back then?
I knew Freddie Fender because he played at Papa Joe's, where I worked at as a bartender from 1966. I'd worked there for a year till '67, and he was in the band, the house band for the jam session.
Do you know who else was in that band?
Yeah, it was Freddie Fender, Little Joe Lambert, drums, Johnny Panino on sax, Joey Long on guitar, and Skip Easterling on the organ.
And so when they would have, how long would they play all night, or would they?
They would start at 3 in the morning, 3 in the morning until about 7 o'clock, and that's where all the strippers went when they got off of work, the pimps, the gangsters. it was some kind of a crowd, but they were good tippers because they were in the hospitality industry, so they all tipped good.
Were there any good stories you remember from back in the day from that?
Let me see. Something I really can't say. But, well, the main story is it was such an interesting place to work at, you know, and you work until the sun comes out. It's funny how New Orleans, that people loved that kind of thing, to stay up all night. Another place was like that was the Dream Room. They had a jam session every Sunday morning. It was Danny White and the Cavaliers were the headline band. And it was a cool thing to do when you were a teenager, to stay up to go to the jam session. I was going in there when I was 17 years old.
So that you got to see Danny White before he got ran out of New Orleans.
Yes, I saw Danny White. And someone also said, I forgot who it was, played on Bourbon Street. I can't recall seeing him there. It was Mr. Google Eyes.
Oh, Joe August.
Yeah, Joe August, right. He played in Jimmy's.
He was amazing. I saw him like too ice sing, but he was an amazing
singer.
singer.
Yeah, what a character.
What was he like when he played Jimmy's?
Just, I can't recall anything unusual, you know, just good entertainer.
But so he was playing on Bourbon Street a lot back then, wasn't he?
I don't remember too much from them, but he was. And I remember that he was looked down upon because he had a white girlfriend, and he'd show around in his Cadillac, show off.
What about, did you know Frogman back from Bourbon Street?
I knew him from playing, on Bourbon Street.
I mean, because the other thing is, like, people don't realize that back then, not only, so you had, didn't Al Hirt had his club back on Bourbon Street?
Yes, right. Al Hirt. I remember going to a lot of shows there. I remember seeing Cab Calloway there.
And he had that, it had the rotating stage, if I remember.
I don't quite remember that, but I can remember.
I can remember that.
Al Hirt's club. I saw a lot of good, interesting shows there, and also Frankie Ford played on Bourbon Street for years at this place where it was a piano bar, it was patio. I can't think of the name of it. It was further down Bourbon Street. And then he played there for years. You know the name of the place?
Was that
Yeah.
Lafitte's? No.
No, that was Feats in Exile. It was a gay club. And,
No, but he was there. And then, who was the other? I'm trying to remember.
Did you ever? You would have been young, but did you ever see a piano player called Archibald at Poodle's Patio?
no. Poodle's Patio wasn't on Bourbon Street. It was on Royal Street.
Oh, I thought it was on Bourbon.
No, it was on Royal. It was a cousin of mine who owned it, named B.B. Anselmo. But no, I
How
can't.
many clubs was the extended Anselmo family responsible for?
Quite a few. A cousin owned the Dream Room, Sam Anselmo.
The Dream Room, that was where
Johnny Rivers played there.
Johnny Rivers played
Yeah,
there.
he
But
played there.
was that when he was still Johnny?
That's when he kind of first started out.
Yeah,
Johnny Rivers.
Johnny, what is it?
His Italian last name, but it was
Restamo,
Johnny
yeah,
Rivers.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, right.
And then also he had
he played there.
Earl Stanley had all those bands that played.
Yeah, exactly. Earl Stanley would have bands that would play there. And like I mentioned, Danny White, and that was a popular place. It was a bigger place than Papa Joe's. Papa Joe's had a jam session every night, and the Dream Room had one Sunday morning.
Did was Danny when Danny White was playing? Was that when he had his big hit, "Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye"?
Yes, and Loan Me Your Handkerchief.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you have any dealings with Jim Garrison?
No, but I can remember when that was going on, because he got rid of the B drinking, which was a good thing, because that was a pretty bad thing they were doing,
Can you explain what that is?
Well, B drinking was when it was all orchestrated by the waiter and the stripper. Okay, guy would come in a club and the stripper say, "Hey, would you like to buy me a drink? Let's go back in the booth where it's nice and dark." Okay, so they get back there and say, "Could you buy me a drink?" And the drinks were real expensive, and it would lead up to a bottle of champagne, which was $30. But they'd start off with the drinks, and the waiter, it was all orchestrated. He'd bring the drink and like a side drink, like Coke, whatever, and with a napkin around it where she didn't have to get drunk. She'd spit the liquor out in that, and he kept taking that, getting rid of it, and she kept spitting the drink so she could drink a lot, okay? And, she'd grab him by the leg, okay, and then she'd get a little closer up, okay, and then, guys getting horny, "Could you buy me a bottle of champagne?" That was $30. I got a good story leading up to this. So, it was kind of bad, really, because the guy didn't get anything out of it. At least at a whorehouse, a guy could get something out of it. All they got was a big tease and the B drinking. And that was prevalent a lot in all the clubs. So Garrison put a stop to that. And my story, if I remember, I was working at my dad's place around closing time, and there was a strip club called the Circus Club across the street, okay? And some guy who probably threw all his money away with the tease with the B drinker, and he was waiting outside because the stripper promised him we could get together once I'm off not working. So I was watching all this, and she kept coming out the door and telling the guy, "Please move on. My boss doesn't want you this close to the door." Oh, okay, reluctantly he'd move on. Then he'd get closer to the door, and she says, "You gotta move on, closer, but you can't be so close to the door." And as he got far away enough, she jumped in the cab. And this guy's running down Bourbon Street. "Stop!" B drinking was a bad thing. He did good by closing that down.
So let's come back a little bit to Danny White. How was he as a showman?
Oh, fantastic.
Did he have anything that he was trademarked that he was known for, or
Just those songs everyone liked. "Loan Me Your Handkerchief." That was one of them. "Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye." I think that was another one.
do you know the story of why he left New Orleans?
I don't know.
I was just curious because I know he was told to leave New Orleans and never come back, but I don't know.
Well, I do remember the black entertainers couldn't mingle. They had to stay in the dressing room back in those days.
Was that something that, like club owners, like your family members, were they?
Well, they had to abide by it. That was the law.
Enforcing that?
That was the law, And because I remember as a little boy, one time my dad had another restaurant. I was a little boy called Ciro's. He specialized in lasagna, and it was right by the famous door. I can recall some black people walking towards Bourbon Street, and the police would stop them. They were allowed to go and work in the clubs, but they couldn't socialize on Bourbon Street. "What are you doing here? You work here?" No, we just come to have a funeral." "Well, you don't belong here." Chased them away.
So they couldn't go. So up to when did that really change?
Kind of in the late 60s, they passed the law, didn't they? But they didn't institute it right away, because I remember when I worked at Papa Joe's in '66, we did have black people coming there.
Yeah, there's the famous incident with the AFL in '65.
Right, the black players weren't allowed in the club, so they moved the Pro Bowl game to Houston. I remember, right. I have a story about that at one of my first clubs too. Okay, you want to tell the story? Okay, my first club was called Co-Eds, and I opened that up in '67. And I had an uncle that had an amusement called Butak Amusement. He financed it. I paid $13,000 for it. You know, I was a young guy, 22 years old. And the Saints started in '67. I was a big Saints fan, and one of the people working for the Saints used to come in my club, and he had a bar tab. And also he got a job as an equipment guy with the Saints. And I kept asking him to bring some Saints players by my club. I'd love to meet some, introduce them to, you know. So, and so he brought by Don McCall, 2 black players and a white player. I remember some of the regulars coming in the co-eds and saying, "What are those," using the N-word, "doing here? You know, what are?" I said, "That's Don McCall from the Saints." "Get me an autograph." So that changed all right there. All of a sudden they're not the N-word, okay? They're human beings, okay, because they're Saints players. So that's my story there.
Any other music from Bourbon Street from that era?
The Sho Bar was a club that had music also.
Right.
They had entertainment that came in. Matter of fact, Louis Prima played there.
Did you ever have anything to do with Sam Butera?
I saw his shows on Bourbon Street, yeah, at the Dream Room, matter of fact. He played there. And I saw Louis Prima's shows he played the Dream Room, and also he played at the Sho Bar, okay? And talking about the Dream Room, my dad told me to come by during the daytime to meet Frank Sinatra. Okay, he was at the Dream Room doing the day before they were open, sat down talking with my cousin, Sam Anselmo, who owned it. And my dad was there, so I came by and I'm sitting there in awe. I can't believe this is Frank Sinatra. But what was so astonishing about the whole story, Frank Sinatra used to be an amateur boxer, okay? And he was so intrigued about my dad. He wanted to hear all my dad's boxing stories. And I'm saying, look at this. Frank Sinatra is intrigued with my dad, you know? And my dad no big deal, you know what I mean? Frank Sinatra, it was a big deal to me. So I got to sit there and face to face with Frank Sinatra.
How much real estate would you say of that quarter did your family, in terms of clubs, own? Because it seems like they owned a lot of stuff.
Well, you know, a lot of the clubs, they didn't own them, they leased them out. My dad owned his property, and I think he sold it in 1952 for $50,000.
Which is probably a good deal of money back
I guess
then.
so, you know, and now those places will sell for about $30 million, maybe more. But I'm trying to figure some of Sam and Anselmo owned that one, and I can't think of any other ones right offhand.
So what was young Johnny Rivers like back in the day?
Oh, very cool, you know. I like the slick hair he had back, you know.
Because he was, I think it was Johnny Ramostella, I believe.
That's his real last name,
yeah,
but it was Johnny Rivers then.
Yeah,
right.
Because his first record was on Johnny
exactly.
Ramostella, and then he went there. Now, did you also have any of the Clantons, Jimmy Clanton playing?
Jimmy Clanton, you know what I mean? Just a Dream.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if he played there, but I did see Jimmy Clanton at a show at the Municipal Auditorium with Jerry Lee Lewis, Jimmy Clanton, Chuck Berry, Mac Rebennack was playing on that show. It was in 1957.
So was Rebennack's band the backing band for anything, or is he just?
He was, you know, playing there with his band at the auditorium. But he played at a lot of the dances around town. There was a place called, when I was a teenager, called St. Anthony's, there was a dance there. There was another one, I can't think of the name of it, but he played around a lot of these teenage dances.
The CYO type dances.
CYO dances.
And then there were some of those teen clubs, I remember.
Yeah, right. There was one place on Bank Street, I can't think of the name of it right offhand, you know. It seemed big when I was little, now it's a very small place, you know.
It was
Germania Hall.
Germania Hall, you got it, man. All right.
There's
The
Germania
tip of my
Hall, and
tongue.
then there was like that uptown. There was an uptown club that, like, for a lot of the kids uptown, that grew up uptown, that they
Valencia.
Yeah, Valencia, right. And also there was a club called, not a club, it was a building, the Italian Hall, and they had rock shows there too on Esplanade Avenue.
Oh wait, so this is there were the Unione Italiana, whatever that this was.
That building on
big
Esplanade,
stucco, tall building.
they had rock shows
They
there.
had- can you tell me about that? Because I know it's well documented that there were jazz shows there in the 20s, but I didn't know about the rock.
Yeah, the rock shows were in the 50s. I can't recall some of the bands, but I remember seeing a lot of bands there, you know, rock shows.
Now, did you ever come into contact back in the day? I mean, obviously, with Fats and Smiley Lewis or any of those. Fats,
Well,
Bobby Mitchell.
I've seen Fats at different places. I saw him later in life, you know, not doing that time. You know, I saw him on the Riverboat President, you know, and his son used to play in my club, Fats Domino Jr. at Jimmy's back in the day.
Did any of the so back in the day there was a couple of those early white rock and roll bands, the Sparks and the Jokers. Did any of those bands ever play your dad's clubs?
No, they did play his club. No.
Okay, and what about
That was kind of later on, you know, the Mardi Gras Lounge. He sold it in 1952. You know.
or maybe I'm thinking of the Dream Room, and then all.
No, but I know Stanley played there. You know, what's his name, the bass player?
Yeah,
He played there with different bands,
I
and
think there was a band called the Saxons.
I think they might have played the Dream Room, right? Back in the early '60s.
There's one last question maybe about Bourbon Street, which is I'm curious about where Bourbon Street sat in the larger world of the music industry. Like, was it a stepping stone for local artists to get out? Was it a place where people were trying to be discovered? Was it a place where people were happy to have a regular gig? What was your experience?
I think it was happy to have a regular gig, you know, like Mac Rebennack had a regular gig. He was just happy to have a gig, you know. But, because most of the, you know, the clubs weren't very big on Bourbon Street. You know, they were relatively small if you look.
How many people were in the Dream Room?
The Dream Room was a little bit bigger than a lot of clubs, but I think the capacity of the Dream Room was maybe 200 people, the most.
So back in the day, you know, you had all these clubs. They had bands. They had the show. You know, the burlesque clubs. It was like shows. Was it more like an adult, like more like people went out for like, you know, to go like like you were going to a show, like a Vegas type thing, where you're going to the show and then going and getting some after dinner, or was it more just?
Well, you know, the people dressed up, and you know, they went to the Famous Duel, places like my dad's club, the Dream Room. Yeah, they dressed up. That was a place to go.
What would, you know, for instance, what would be like the age group for like any of your dad's club back in the day?
I'd say people probably in their mid-20s and 30s and 40s.
Okay, and what about, say, the Dream Room?
Now, Dream Room was a young crowd that went there, you know, because I was going there underage when I was like 17. Jam session.
What about like Papa Joe's?
The place, it was, let me see, well, it was, like I said, it was most of the strippers when they got off of work, so they're in their 20s.
In their 20s.
Right.
Maybe, and like the Famous Store?
Famous Store was a little bit older crowd, you know. A lot of celebrities would go into the Famous Store too, because I met Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher there. My dad took me to introduce me to them. They were there, and a lot of celebrities. That's why it was called the Famous Store, because they had a big list on the front of the place with all the famous people that went there, you know.
What
So,
about was there a place called the Paddock Lounge?
Oh yeah, that was Steve Valenti's Paddock Lounge. Papa Celestine was a headliner there later on, back in the late 50s and 60s.
And where was that?
That was down the street from the Mardi Gras Lounge, I think in the 200 block of Bourbon.
Was there any other, besides those named clubs, was there any other really famous music club back then in the 50s or 60s on Bourbon that people would go to?
I think I named them all: the Sho Bar, the Dream Room, the Famous Door, and my dad's club, you know, at the time. But well, there was a place that opened up, I can remember. I can't think of the name of it, and they had some big headline acts in there that opened up on the 200 block of Bourbon Street. And they had some big name acts that played there. I can't think of the name of it. It was, it might have been, it's called the Whiskey A Go-Go, possibly.
Yeah, the Whiskey A Go-Go. When, you see, when I was talking, so years ago, Johnny Rivers was really the name. He was the first, and then after him, they would send Billy
Sarah
Riley.
Vaughan played there, and if you look up on the computer, you see some big names played there.
Did you, so, you know, so how old were you probably around 1965, 66?
21.
So you were young.
Yes.
Did you go see, so the Beatles hit and you having all these New Orleans garage bands or stuff forming.
Right.
Did you go to see any of those, go to any of those clubs or go see any of those bands back then?
What kind of bands? No, I'm sorry, the question.
The band, you know, the Beatles, after the Beatles formed and all these kids got inspired and started forming, you know, their own rock bands and garage bands.
I remember some of the bands kind of impersonated the Beatles,
Right.
you know, some of the bands. Earl Stanley was in a band that did that. They all sort of wear their hair like the Beatles. And
did you ever go to a place called the Beaconette?
no, not really, because I had my own club then. You know, I had, my first club was called Co-Eds. It was on the 800 block of Carrollton Avenue. But what other places that I went to? I went to Ball and Jack's a few times. That's where the Sheiks used to play before they played my club.
So when did you, so what year did you start Co-Eds?
1967.
1967.
Yeah.
So do you remember any of the bands that were playing Co-Eds back then?
I rarely had bands, okay? It was like a college hangout. I would hire a fraternity president and say, you can get a job as a bartender if you bring your fraternity here. It was just like a college hangout. And occasionally I'd have bands, maybe once a year for a promo special.
And where was this?
That was 800 South Carrollton, uptown.
Okay. So what was across street there?
By the Riverbend Shopping Center,
By the Riverbend.
Maple Street.
Okay.
Then after that, I had a
Barroom now, right?
yeah, it's called Mannigan's. Yeah, and then later I opened up a club called Quasimodo's.
And where was that?
That was half a block down the street. I owned two clubs at the time, Co-Eds and Quasimodo's. Then eventually I sold Co-Eds and had Quasimodo's.
Did you? So what type of club was Quasimodo's?
It was another just hangout place. You know, I had it built from empty space.
And what was what did that, like the interior, what was that like?
Kind of like a Gothic scene because of Quasimodo's. I had a big nude picture of Esmeralda behind the bar, you know, with Quasimodo lurking in the background. You know.
And so how long was that open for?
I opened in '72, and I signed the lease for which was Jimmy's now, was Al Pellegrini's club, and then I sold it like in 1977.
So what inspired you? So you have two clubs, you're going from college hangouts, all of a sudden you decide, I want to go do music. What was the inspiration for
Well,
that?
I saw myself at Quasimodo's after I sold, you know, the Co-Eds. And I remember Jed's open up, and he was having live music, and I was really impressed by that. And also, in a situation where, you know, I'm kind of like in my late 20s and talking to myself, Jimmy, where are you going to be at in the next 5 or 10 years? I didn't want to be in a small club. You can only do so much business in a small club. And I wanted to venture out and open up a music club. So this guy who owned Al Pellegrini's pool hall, which became Jimmy's, he'd come in there every now and then. And he says, you should buy, you know, my club, you know. And I kind of thought about it, you know, and it was a dilapidated building, but it had all that potential, you know, having a nice big space for a music club. And I decided, make your move, which I did. I signed the lease on Al Pellegrini's, bought it for $13,000, and the only customers he had there were a bunch of dope heads from the methadone clinic. Wasn't much of a crowd, so I closed it down. After about 2 weeks, because my rent was only $200 a month, and I said, well, let me start seeking financing to renovate the building, to open up a club. And I wasn't going to call it Jimmy's. I was going to call it the Depot. And I didn't call it the Depot because my friends kept saying, at the time, Rosie's was open. That was a nice club, you know, when I was renovating the property. And then she was a nice girl. She was very rich, multi-millionaire, and that was one of the nicest clubs I've ever seen in New Orleans, Rosie's. And my friends kept saying, Jimmy, if a rich girl can name her club Rosie's, you can name your club Jimmy's. And I was reluctant to call it Jimmy's because I was a long shot. You know, I didn't have any money, you know. It was going to all be for financing it. And so I kept thinking, you know, without much money to back me up, you know, if I went out of business after a year or two, I'd be the laughingstock of New Orleans. And I didn't want that. So, but I said, I will call it Jimmy's. And it was a good thing that did. When you have your name on a business, you strive harder to make sure you're not the laughingstock of New Orleans. So Jimmy's it was.
How much did you have to change in terms of the floor plan to have it become Jimmy's?
Okay, the floor plan they had was just kind of empty space. You know, of course, right. I did some additional work later on, but the first year I opened, prior to that, when I was going around the city looking at all the different bands to see which bands I could hire. Tipitina's was open a year before I was, so I'd go there a lot and see, you know, the Neville Brothers, Little Queenie, and they used to go out by the lakefront and see the Radiators. They played at a club on Elysian Fields. I can't think of the name of it. Luigi's. I'd go see them and all. And then also, you know, I would go to Rosie's, and I couldn't afford those bands that Rosie had. You know, she had people like Ray Charles play there.
She had the meters there.
Yeah, okay. So, and I got to be friends with some of the musicians and, you know, told them I was opening up a club, and I got to meet Leo Nocentelli, you know, from the Meters, and Little Queenie. So when I first opened, I had ideas that I wanted to have a better layout than Tipitina's. Tipitina's at the bar, you couldn't see the show.
Because Tipitina's had the bar one.
It was just on the main floor. The stage was on the main floor.
Right,
so if you were at the bar, you couldn't see over the head. So I said, when I designed Jimmy's, I built the bar with a raised level about this high, maybe this higher up. You know, it was like 3 steps you had to walk up so everybody could see the show where the bar was, and that's where your money's at, the bar.
Right, because people don't remember, you know, Jordan Tipitina's used to have the bar, you'd walk in, and the bar would swing out horizontally. Right. And it wasn't until it was renovated by was it the Greens renovated it in '86?
Later on he renovated it, right.
Yeah, then they went to the sidebars, but before it had the bar swinging it swung out, come around like this, and then they would have, next to that, they used to have the food counter right there. They had a kitchen, and they'd serve red beans and rice. And
well, I didn't have food at Jimmy's. I wanted to have food, okay? I went to the banks and did my little yuppie routine, got all dressed up with a little briefcase. I had an artist friend of mine make some renderings of what Jimmy's would look like. And I went seeking money, you know, and I went to every bank, and they all turned me down. And then I said, well, my next move is to try to get the money from the SBA. and I applied for the SBA loan, and my credit was good, and so I was going to have a grill in Jimmy's or the Depot, and my original loan was like about $85,000. You know, that included the grill. So they supply you with a caseworker at the SBA to help you go through. You have a lot of paperwork to go through to get a loan there, and he helped me out with all of that. And I had to have projections with this and that. So they originally turned down my loan for $85,000, and my caseworker said, "I'll resubmit it. Could you get this work done for $65,000?" I said, "Yeah, sure I can." You know, I'm gonna say no. So I got the loan for $65,000, and then I started renovating Al Pellegrini's. Now, they don't give you $65,000. They give you, you have to have bonded contractors, carpenters, plumbers, electrician, and they gave them, the SBA, half the money, and we gave them the other half after they finished their job.
So while this was going on, did you have an idea in your head who you thought, which band, what you wanted the band-wise, who you were going to hire?
Well,
what you
I
had a
mean,
vision for the
I
club?
grew into the club to you know what became where I did a whole lineup of different entertainment. In the beginning, I kind of wanted more or less have a lot like Tipitinas, which they had more rhythm and blues, and I thought that was maybe the direction to go in. And so in the beginning, you know, my opening night I had Little Queen, the second night the Neville Brothers, and then I thought, you know, I'd booked up before the jazz act, Sonny Stitt, and I lost my ass. All the money I made from the first weekend, I lost it. And so I didn't have any money to pay any big guarantees on any national acts or anything. So, but the ones that I knew would make the guarantee were like the Neville Brothers, and then Sheiks came along and they played there, you know, quite a bit in the early days. And then later on, I started doing a lot of the punk bands because they didn't require a guarantee. They would do it for the door. And that kind of worked out fine for me because I didn't have the money anyway.
We talk about some of those bands. I don't remember some.
Sure. Okay, so there was, let's talk a little bit, did the Coldplay your bar a lot?
Oh, a lot, because I definitely wanted them. I wanted to make sure I treated them well. I wanted to make sure they liked Jimmy's, because how can you not when every time they played, they'd have 800 people there.
And they, so, and their heyday was probably what, late
79, 80, 81, 82, 83.
So they were really, at that point, they were probably the one biggest band ready to break out of
Yes,
the monster.
yes, they were the biggest draw. Sheiks drew well, Radiators, Neville Brothers, but no one did it like the Cold.
So then the Cold broke up, and then somewhere another band became very popular and actually had the first, one of the early videos on MTV and had a top 30 hit was a band called the Red Rockers.
Yes. Before that, they played my club, the Rat Finks.
Remember anything about?
I got a story about the Red Rockers. They did real well, you know, at the club. And at the time, slam dancing came around, which I hated slam dancing. And the reason why I kept thinking, some top-notch lawyer's daughter going to break her neck and I'm going to sue my ass. So I tried to put a stop to it, okay? And the Red Rockers didn't like that at all. They put out some posters at Jimmy that said, "No dance oppression at Jimmy's." And they laugh at it now. They're in their late 50s now, you know? And so, and I just kind of let that go eventually. I went along with the scene. Didn't like it, but, you know, that was part of the scene then, slam dancing. You want to hear a funny story about slam dance?
Sure.
Okay. Place was packed. I forgot which punk band I had there. It might have been the Chili Peppers or somebody where it was packed. And some guy comes up to the bar and he said, "Call an ambulance." I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "My friend dove off the stage and no one caught him. Busted his head." And I'm saying, think, Jimmy, I don't want no ambulance coming to my club. You know? So I gave him a bar towel. I said, here, put this around his head. Oxnard Hospital is 5 minutes away. You can get there a lot quicker than an ambulance coming there. Thanks. That's my slam dancing story.
Because I mean, there was the Red Rockers. Did they have any sort of signature look, or I don't remember.
You know, they kind of dressed up somewhat like rockabilly style or whatever at the time, and nothing different, you know, except the music, you know.
And then there was a band called the Normals.
Yes, that was like probably the first punk band. And Chris Luckett was in the band. He was the drummer of the Cole, but he was in the Normals.
And that, you know, they became now kind of cult figures because of that record.
Right.
Very collectible record.
Yeah, they played my club quite a bit.
There was them. There was another band called the Wayward Youth, I believe.
Yes, yes, the Wayward Youth.
And then another band, there was the Backbeats.
They were more rockabilly than punk.
Right.
The Normals were punk. Wayward Youth was punk. The Sluts, they were punk.
The Sluts were punk.
Right.
Because really, I mean, most at the time, there wasn't a lot of places for them to play, if I remember.
No, very few places. You know, Jed's, my club, and
maybe
there was a place across the street from Tipitina's. It was a bar. They played there.
Rose Tattoo.
Rose Tattoo. They played there.
And then there wasn't a place. There was Andy Capp's.
That was more like recorded music.
That was more recorded. That was like the one punk club.
They played, you know, recorded punk, but it was not entertainment. It was too small for entertainment.
And then there was Waka Jawaka.
Waka Waka?
Waka Waka, yeah.
Waka Waka, W-A-K-A-W-A-K. That was like a ska band. And that scene came along, the ska bands. I had a lot of ska bands play Jimmy's national acts.
I'm trying to remember who else was there locally. There was
Uncle Stan and Auntie Vera.
I don't remember them.
Yeah, that was
I remember Lenny Zenith.
Right.
And RZA.
Right. They did pretty well. They played there.
And then there was another band. Now, did you get the Longhair played your club, Professor Longhair?
Yes, yes.
And how many times did he play there?
The first time he played there was a benefit to help WWOZ open. It was called Ain't Nothing But a Party. It was him and the Neville Brothers played there, and James Booker. And Michael Smith came by, photographed a lot of that, the photojournalist. You remember him, don't you?
Yeah.
I got a fantastic photograph of Ricky Lee Jones came by as a special guest. She was in town. And matter of fact, I'll show it to you before y'all leave, was James Booker and Ricky Lee Jones. Ain't Nothing But a Party at Jimmy's.
When you had Longhair or Booker playing, did you have a piano? Have to get a piano for them, or did they just use a portable?
I had a piano in the club. Matter of fact, somebody said I got a piano. Would you like it? It was an upright piano. And when James Booker would play on a weekday, I had the piano on the raised level of the club, and I would darken the rest of the club to make it more intimate with James Booker, closer to the bar, and I was the bartender. So it was Booker night with Jimmy the bartender and James Booker.
So how many out of when he would play there, did he actually play, or did he sit there catatonic? Or
no, he played. He played. Yeah, I used to hear stories about him. Would just walk away in the middle of a set at the Maple Leaf. You know, no, but he played. It was nice. We became good friends, and he liked me, and I liked him. He was honored to be his friend.
And you also, and then when did you build the patio outside?
Well, my other improvement to the club was I was only using like 70% of the club when I first opened, because I had like another whole room was I could enlarge the place by about 30-35%. Wasn't in use; it was just used for storage. So about 82, I I had the stage originally on the right-hand side. Then I had another room and a few pool tables. I didn't need that; wasn't necessary. So I took that wall out and another wall and put the stage at the far corner of the club. And that's when it became the capacity around 800-900 people.
And then when did you?
The patio.
Outside.
My landlord, nice people, okay. And so I had the whole time I had very reasonable rent at Jimmy's, and they owned the house next door to Jimmy's, and I'd always wanted to rent that out. And then eventually, when the people moved away, my landlord said, "It's available. Would you like that property?" And I leased it out. And once I leased that property out, gave me, you know, the ability to build a patio in between Jimmy's, you know, and the house. And I used the house also as a dressing room and for storage. And always helps to have a nice dressing room for the bands, because those are people you want to stay in good touch with and make them comfortable. So I had like a little small alleyway that went from the house to the smaller dressing room I used to have right by the stage. And, you know, had a nice couch there and, you know, 3 or 4 rooms, bathroom there, and they really appreciated that.
So Jimmy's, so you're doing, you know, because remember you had a lot of punk bands in the 80s and a lot of rock shows. What were some of the bigger shows that you remember doing back then?
Greg Allman, you know, the rock bands were the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
That was like the first time they came to New Orleans. I remember they played your club.
Yeah, right. Psychedelic Furs. I have to look at my book over there. See some of them. So I did everything in music because I didn't want to be known eventually as just one style of music. You know, people would try to use that against me. You know, I remember Marcia Ball played at the Maple Leaf, and I wanted her to play at Jimmy's, and I think a manager says, "Oh, you don't want to play there, it's a punk club." And I said, "Well, when the Neville Brothers played Jimmy's, there aren't any punks." and when the Sluts played Jimmy's, there's nobody from the Neville Brothers to see that band. And I did every band. I didn't want to be typed in as one kind of music.
You would draw a different crowd for a different...
That's what I did. I did different crowd. I did reggae, I did punk, I did all of it. Every genre of music. Except jazz, that didn't sell.
So when you did the Sluts, were they out of control, or were they?
No, just wild. That's all. You know, not really. A bunch of nonsense.
Yeah, no, I'm friends with Dave.
Right, exactly. There wasn't
Dave Dave's a nonsense. Likes to engage in fun.
Right.
But also probably hard to shock someone who grew up on Bourbon Street in the 50s, right?
No, was I shocked?
Well, I'm saying, like, imagine there was little that you hadn't encountered.
Well, I was a businessman, yeah. And I got to tell you my Greg Allman story. At the time, Tipitina's was closed, okay? Old Man Rivers was closed. I was kind of like, at one time, the only major nightclub around. Was that about 85 or something
84,
like that?
85, yeah.
83, something like that. Greg Allman wanted to play the club. And I wasn't, you know, I was wise enough not to just pay any big guarantees for some of these big acts. That's why a lot of other businesses went out of business. Their egos said, "Oh, I got to have this such and such a band." So Greg Allman wanted to play the club. His management called there, and they wanted like $15,000. And I said, "I don't give guarantees." "This is Greg Allman." I said, "I know, but I don't give guarantees." You know, I said, "You can do a door deal." And I said, "Well, I don't know." You know, so they called me about 3 days later and said, "Okay, we'll do a door deal. We want 100% of the door." I said, No, I can't do 100% of the door. I'll do 80% because I have to pay production, security, stagehands, all of that, advertisement. So reluctantly, they went for it. Greg Allman played. He made $17,000, and we rang up close to $20,000.
People forget that he was living a lot in Slidell because his girlfriend was with his
I wasn't
girlfriend
aware
back
of that.
then in
Okay.
the 60s. And I'm sorry, late 60s, early
Okay.
70s, he was
Right.
living there, and that's why when they would go plug in the gazebo, because
All right.
they were around.
I was really thrilled to have him because I was a big fan of the Allman Brothers. Big fan.
Did you spend any time at the warehouse back in the day?
I would go there occasionally because a lot of my people worked for me also worked at the warehouse. I can remember seeing Quiet Riot, and, Blue Oyster Cult. You know, a lot of times I wouldn't be open because I realized this is not a bar I'm running; it's a concert venue. So I didn't have to open 7 days a week. Some days I'd open 4, some days I'd open 3. You know, and a lot of these other nights, and of course there were a lot of perks owning a music club because a lot of the promoters that did bigger shows, they did some of their smaller shows at Jimmy's. So I was always on their guest list. So all the shows at the Sanger, the Riverboat President, the Warehouse, I was on their guest list.
When you know, one of the things is, I'm curious is, so you're doing, obviously it was a business. How much, when you were booking, was acts you actually liked musically versus acts you just had to book to keep
mean
the doors?
booking things I didn't
that
particularly
you
like?
but you knew would make money, yeah.
I was a businessman, you know.
Yeah, so how, out of that percentage, how much would you say that you put stuff that you...
I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. Maybe, I don't want to knock any band or anything, but,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I wasn't a big fan of some of those punk shows, you know, but yet I'm there to make money, you know. I had earplugs.
No, I just, you know, because a lot of times you'll hear people say, I booked stuff for my business, but it's not necessarily what
Well,
I like.
I kind of grew into enjoying a lot of the music too. You know, I liked the Red Rockers; they were good for what they did. Psychedelic Furs, they were good. The Red Hot Chili Peppers, you know, they're good bands.
Yeah, no, they can play.
Right.
They're all good. Yeah.
Right.
Were there any touring bands that sort of developed a relationship with New Orleans through their gigs at Jimmy's? I know you had a lot of return, you know, a lot of acts that weren't from the city but were at your club on a regular basis.
Levon Helm played quite a bit. You know, he liked New Orleans. I became good friends with Levon. Invited him to our wedding. He came to my wedding, him and his wife, in '97.
Was that the time when he had Levon Helm and the RCO All Stars?
No, he had a band called the Kate Brothers Band. They were a band. Levon Helm was from Arkansas, and that was a band from his hometown. They played with him.
Okay, I remember them because
The
they
Kate Brothers.
Because then they played when they reformed the band and
Right.
did that one tour.
Exactly.
The singer, they played with them. The Kate Brothers, I remember that.
Just a wonderful person. No ego, just everyday people. Really, we're good friends.
Did you help him with that at all, with that club that he had for a while?
No, but a good friend of mine helped him. His name was Carmen Marana. He had clubs in New Jersey, whatever. He's the one who was the backup man for that club.
Yeah. But at that point, Levon had held throat cancer, so his voice wasn't strong enough, if I remember.
Well, I don't know. It just wasn't made sense to have a club that wasn't like the House of Blues, so close to it. And,
Yeah, they were right across the street.
Yeah,
I remember
right.
that much. But I also remember at that point his voice was still trying to get strong again.
Right,
He said,
right.
just not, you know, because he had surgery and he was in recovery
Right.
phase from cancer. Fabulous musician, though.
Oh, fantastic. Drummer for the band. Yeah, he was. And a wonderful person. Honored to be his friend.
And how many people could say they were from Turkey Scratch, Arkansas? Which is not easy to find.
Yeah.
I've been there.
That was in the Delta, yeah.
Yeah, it's right by.
Right, exactly.
You got to go down some dirt roads to get there.
Of any other artists like that come to mind? People from out of town that became regulars?
Let me think right now. I can't think right offhand.
Maybe any folks who were regulars in the audience? Any people that you got to know?
A lot of celebrities used to come to Jimmy's. Became good friends with Harry Shearer. He used to come. And matter of fact, he was a bass player, of course, of that movie he was in. He used to sit in with the Radiators. And,
This was probably Jimmy's and Spinal Tap were probably
yeah.
peaking at the same time.
Okay. So he would come in there, and I'm trying to think of another one. A lot of actors and all would come in the club. I can't recall the names right offhand. Bono from U2 came in the club one time. Got to meet him. Stephen Stills came in there one time. You know.
He is from past Christian area.
Stephen Stills?
Yes, and the family's
Yeah,
from
well,
there.
he went to LSU. And
yeah, and he was back here hanging around in the 86. He was
Okay.
he was back in New Orleans for a
Okay.
while. I
Well,
remember
the
that.
band playing at the time was Clifton Chenier, and he was with this girl was showing him around, you know, and they asked if he could sit in, and Clifton Chenier wouldn't let him sit in. He said, "Man, I don't know that person," so he didn't sit in.
Did you book a lot of, you know, you would have booked back then Clifton and Rockin' Doopsie Sr., correct?
Yes, right, and the Zydeco Twisters, right.
So Twister. Did you ever book Bois at like Connery Fontenot or Bois Sec, or they were more down the street at the Maple Leaf, around the
What was the
corner?
name of the band? Boss Claus?
No, not Boss Claus. Bois Sec Artois.
I can't recall that
Or
band right offhand.
no, so he probably played more at the Maple
Okay,
Leaf with
right.
Connery Fontenot, because the Maple Leaf was doing a lot of more of those guys
Right,
back then.
right, because they had a Cajun night, dance
Yeah.
night once a week.
Can you speak a little bit to the other clubs that came up in that neighborhood? I mean, I know that Jimmy's was an anchor there, but there were some other ones. Can you talk a little bit about what the scene was like?
Well, where Jed's was, that was a different clubs, different name changes and everything. The most they stayed open was maybe 2 or 3 years. There was like Tupelo's.
Tupelo's, Jed's, and it was
I can't think
disco
of
for a
another
little
name
bit.
for it, you know. And
then it became Muddy Waters, if I remember later on.
yeah, right. Then it was Muddy Waters, right. And let me see what other clubs. There were a lot of clubs that opened music out in Fat City in Canada. There was Richie's 3D. They had some big names out there.
Huggies Delago was out there.
Yeah, Augie Delagos and The Place. That was the trouble. They went after the big names and they couldn't make it. You know, they lost their money, let their egos get in the way.
Did you? I mean, out of what you booked, how much was local versus how much was bands coming in out of town?
It didn't matter, you know. I mean, if I could make a whole ton of money off the locals where I didn't have to pay big guarantees, that was better than the national acts. But of course, I wanted the national acts
Yeah,
too.
I was saying, but
Right.
out of company, how much do you think you booked?
I would say it's probably 70% local, 30%, you know. And at certain times I was able to really go after the big name acts, especially doing the jazz festival, because they had such a big audience in town. And I had 2 weeks of booking the biggest names there were.
What was the impact of Jazz Fest to your
Tremendous,
bottom line?
tremendous. I mean, Mardi Gras was for maybe 4 big nights. I did well. Jazz Festival was 2 weeks.
So was that basically akin to your year's profit was all made in those 2 weeks?
Oh, I did really well, yeah, for 2 weeks. Fantastic. And a lot of the acts I normally wouldn't book because there wasn't an audience for them, and yet there was an audience doing the Jazz Festival. I remember who was the second Beatle guy they called, the fourth Beatle, the black guy, piano player. He played Billy Preston. Yeah, he played there. Buddy Guy, that was a big draw. Buddy Guy playing there.